All right, so welcome everyone for attending this alumni panel. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us today and taking the time out from their busy work schedule to come and give back to our UBCO community. We're so happy to have you here to share your experience with us. And the reason we're actually holding this alumni panel today for the students who are here and don't really know about it, is because one of our panelists here, Matt, who we'll introduce in a bit, one day he just messaged me and said that he wanted to help other UBCO students land good tech jobs by doing mock interviews with them. And I thought that was a really great opportunity. So then we could actually start and do this panel as a kickoff to talk about how we can organize these mock interviews. So if you're interested, make sure you stay till the end, because that's when we're going to talk about these mock interviews and how they work and how you can access them. And before I forget, I just want to mention that I got a lot of help from the Girls in Tech Club who helped organize this. So you can get their social media links at the bottom here. And if I can work this mouse, I can click to the next slide. Okay, so we'll just start off with a brief intro. I don't know everybody's position, so I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. Maybe we'll start with Matt, since I mentioned you earlier.
Yeah, sure. So spoiler alert, my name's Matt. My position, I'm a software engineer at Google. So my position is called a software engineer 3, which corresponds to L4, which means I've been promoted once. So try to figure that one out. As far as how long at the company, I've been at the company about 5.5 years. In that time, I've worked on a bunch of different teams, some like internal products, external products, big teams, small teams, front end, back end, kind of got to do a little bit of it all.
I guess I'll call the name since we can't really figure out who's who in the order. So maybe Yarko can go next.
Sure, yeah. How's it going? I'm Yarko, and I am at Google. I just got promoted to a senior software engineer, so that's L5. Yeah, I've been at Google for about 4 years now, almost to the day. And then I was 2 years before then at Bloomberg, also in New York, based in New York. And so I got a little bit of experience with more on the finance side of New York and more on the tech side. And I work on a Google Maps team here. I've been here since I joined.
Thank you. And Ethan?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Ethan. I've been at Google for 4.5 years now. I started off working at YouTube, the YouTube office in San Bruno. So I worked there on back-end like infrastructure solutions for 1.5 2 years, and then transferred over to Google proper, the HQ, where I was working on augmented reality stuff, specifically for AR Core, just like Android's augmented reality library. So I worked there for, I guess, about 1.5 years. And then I took like a sort of weird sabbatical. There's like a program that Google does where we loan out engineers to teach computer science at different universities around the country. So this was during the pandemic, so I didn't get to go on site, but I taught remotely first year computer science at Morehouse College in Atlanta for a semester. And then I came back and moved from my AR Core team to a different team where I'm working on augmented reality hardware solutions for fancy new toys that hopefully you guys will get to see in 3 years, maybe, if things go well. Yeah, that's, and I'm also software engineer 3, L4, been promoted once, so. Yeah.
Thanks, and Kathy?
Yes, again, I'm Kathy. I'm also a software engineer. I'm a staff software engineer, which is an L6. I work at Facebook actually right now. I've been there for 1.5 years. I work at Facebook's research and development org. It's called New Product Experimentation. So it's a group, it's kind of like an internal incubator where we start up new ideas. We launch them publicly to see like what could be the future of Facebook. Right now I'm working on a music app called Collab. Unfortunately not available in Canada right now, so people can't try it out, but it's for making collaborative music videos. Before that, I was at Google for 4.5 years, and I worked in the VR department, Daydream, prototyping VR productivity apps. So we built some 3D modeling tools. And then we also pivoted into ads where we did lipstick try on in YouTube.
Wow, so cool. Can you believe these are actually our students? Like, I'm so proud of you guys. Oh, so if you get a chance, you should come back and give a talk. I guess, post-COVID period, I'm sure it'll be completely full house at that point. Okay, so just a quick couple of rules I just want to go over. Plan for today is, we just have some general questions, and we're just going to get our panelists to take turns answering these questions, give them their thoughts, their experience on what's happening. And then we'll take the Q&A afterwards. So if you're in the audience, if you can, in the meantime, just turn off your mics and cameras so that if you're viewing the talk, you can actually go to gallery view, and then you'll be able to see all the panels at the same time. So we don't have to worry about the cameras moving back and forth. And then at the end, we'll talk about the mock interviews and how that works. So of course, during the question period, feel free to turn your mic and camera back on and ask your questions. And if you aren't comfortable because we are recording, feel free to type in your questions into the chat, and then I'll be able to answer. I'll be able to ask those questions on your behalf. Okay. So without further ado, the first question, which is kind of like sharing your secrets to us, okay? How did you land a job with a FAANG company? So feel free to talk about your experience, how you got their attention, application package, technical interviews, what have you. So feel free to jump in and tell us about your experience.
I can kick it off. Yeah, so out of college, out of university, I think in the last year, a lot of us were doing interviews with a bunch of companies, and I tried applying for Google at the time, and I got a phone screen, and absolutely did not make it through to any more rounds. And so I had other options, and one of them was Bloomberg, and it pulled me to New York because I love money, and so I got pulled there. And once you do get a foothold at a larger company, it puts you on the radar for a lot of recruiters and things like that. And as well, if you have a network of people who also work in similar companies that you might want to work for. So for example, Cappy and Matt, I think they put in referrals for me at Google, which really helped with my case. I think the second time around, 2 years later, I applied, and I also studied quite a bit with respect to the interviews themselves, which can be quite rigorous. So it's a collection for me of having good friends and putting in the work and studying for the tests, and probably a little bit of luck as well.
Yeah, my experience is pretty similar to that. So I also interviewed with Google and a few other companies during my last year at UBCO. Did the phone screening, I made it to the on-site interview, came back, was denied. So took another job in Vancouver, working for a smaller company out there. Worked there for about a year, and then I was contacted by Google Recruiter again over, I think it was over LinkedIn or email. Anyways, basically like saying that, hey, like you interviewed before, didn't go well, want to try again. So did it the second time. Like Yarko said, like put a lot of time into studying specifically for the technical interviews because unfortunately, at least in my opinion, there's basically two completely different skill sets, and one of them is being a good engineer, and one of them is interviewing for engineering roles. And put a lot more time into like really practicing interviews and stuff. So yeah, did that, got the offer. They offered me a few different, potential locations. I took the YouTube one. Yeah, that was basically how it went for me.
I can talk next.
Oh.
So my Oh, sorry. My path was a little bit different. I applied to Google out of college, did the technical interviews, also didn't make the first round, but then I went into a second placement for something called engineering residency at Google, which is a program for new grad engineers where you do a little bit of training and then you do a rotational program at Google. So I did get that position out the gate. It was only for a 1-year contract, and then eventually I converted full-time after that. I also just like studied like crazy for the tests. And then when I left from Google to go to Facebook, again, studied like crazy. I was recruited, thankfully, which made it a little bit easier, but I had to go through a really crazy round of negotiations, which we can go into, but I refused to leave Facebook or Google to go to Facebook without them up-leveling me. So that was a big part of the negotiations there, which is as you change companies back and forth, you can like negotiate both your position and your salary.
I guess it's Matt.
Yeah, my path was very similar to both Yarko and Ethan, where interviewed out of school, I got on site, I got told maybe, which I have since learned is something they're not supposed to say, but they did. So I got told maybe, I did some more interviews, and then I got told no. Went and worked in Vancouver for a little bit, got contacted by a recruiter, said, hey, do you want to come back and try again? Tried again, ended up in a role that was a much better fit for me, so I think it all worked out good in the end. As far as like negotiation stuff, the only negotiation stuff that I had any experience with was I also interviewed with Amazon at the same time. I didn't actually want to work for Amazon. I just wanted to use them as practice interviews, and I ended up getting an offer from both. So they kind of worked out in my favor that way. But yeah, I certainly didn't go hard on the negotiation front. I was just happy to be in it a big company. So.
So all of you mentioned about studying really hard for it. And one of the questions that we did have from the students was like, do we really have to grind leak code, or is it really just, you know, are they listening for your problem solving skills? What is it that they're really after at these technical interviews?
Yeah, go ahead, Ethan.
Okay. I guess the simple answer is yes. Yes, you do need to grind out those leak code problems, or you know, hacker rank or whatever project, whatever your platform of choice is. These interviews they're hard. They are testing for both problem solving ability as well as like domain knowledge. So what I mean by that is like, when you go into the room or you're over, you know, Zoom or whatever, you really want to look like somebody who's written whatever your code language is, naturally and without a lot of assistance from like an IDE. So the advice I usually give people is like practice in like, you know, Notepad or like something that just gives you like zero help, you know, correcting things. Or on paper, because, you know, if you're planning to do like whiteboarding interviews in person, then, you know, it's all going to be by hand anyways. The other piece of advice that I give people for preparing for interviews is that when you do these technical interviews, you're writing code, they want to hear you explain your thought process or explain, you know, how what you're writing is going to, you know, solve this problem. I found it really helpful when I was practicing to just talk out loud. Because a lot of the times you haven't done it before, you don't actually realize how much like neural bandwidth it takes to write code and talk at the same time. You know, if you've done a lot of interviews or if you've like, you know, taught before, you're probably used to it. But if you haven't done those two things, it will slow you down, and it's worth practicing to make sure that you can do those two things smoothly. You'll feel a lot more confident during the interview process. Yeah, I don't know. Matt, you want to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, do you have to practice? In a word, yes. It's like Ethan mentioned earlier, there's two different skill sets here. One of them is interviewing and the other one is doing the job. And they try as much as they can to have an overlap there. But when you're in an engineering role, a lot of your projects are on the scope of weeks or months, whereas your interview is on the scope of hours. So they really have to condense that down and try to get to the crux of the issue. So that's why there's such a different skill set there. That said, I do think that things like Leak Code, Hacker Rank, cracking the coding interview, like these are really good tools. And a lot of them are things you can do by yourself. We did a lot like speaking for the folks on this call, because we all did it together, like we did a lot of interviews together where one of us would pretend to know the answer and interview the other one. It forces you to do that talking out loud. It gets extra eyes on the problem so that if you get stuck, you can get help. So doing things like the mock interviews with us or with each other, I think is a great way to practice as well.
For what it's worth, that never changes. Like when I switched from Google to Facebook, that was only like a year and a half ago. And I was like, oh, now I got to go study. And like I spent a couple days like cracking the coding interview again and did a bunch of practice again.
Yeah, and personally, I really wanted to go to Google when I was at Bloomberg. And so I set out a regiment of, for 6 months, I did a problem every day, and at least one, and it was without looking at the answer and coding it out for real as though it is a real problem. And that really solidified the basics of the interviews that are asked during interviews. You kind of get to follow a thread that is common throughout a lot of those questions. They fall into certain archetypes. And if you can identify that, you can apply some transferable knowledge from one problem to another. That is if you get quite a bit of experience with them. So for me, it took quite a long time to be really comfortable. And then when I came to apply at Google, they said they don't have a spot for me in New York. So it was almost all for naught, but that's just how it is.
I just want to add to that too. I did a similar thing also where I took several months, in preparation and did, like either like a problem a day during weekdays and then like a couple on weekends and stuff. But the other thing I want to add too is that generally if you're interviewing with like a FANG company, it can be a little different if you're dealing with like a startup or like for a very, very specific role. But usually they're interviewing you for your general engineering ability. Especially coming out of college, it's very unlikely that Google or Facebook or Amazon or Netflix is going to be interviewing you for a specific role. So the domain knowledge that they're looking for is like general computer science, data structures, and algorithms. So I'm mentioning this because when you're studying for these interviews, it's probably not going to be worth your time drilling too deep into like a specific, framework or something, or saying like, even if you're like, I really want to do like, I don't know, GPU, like graphics processing or something. It's fairly unlikely that you're going to be interviewed for like, I don't know, like CUDA problems, like you're better off doing basically kind of your general data structures and algorithms kind of course load and just making sure that you're familiar with the language that you're working in. But yeah, you're not going to be interviewed for something specific. So don't worry too much about specific frameworks and stuff. That can come later in your career if you become a domain expert.
I wanted to ask everyone's opinion on how they sort of put their application package together and how you feel about that from the other end of things now. How important are grades, and what are the most important skills you look for on the resume?
So I definitely can't speak for everyone, but my resume was the same resume to every company. I didn't try to do anything special there. I certainly didn't write a cover letter because I'm not good at writing. My grades, I never really talked about them except for like a quick line on my resume. And all of that is also caveated by the fact that I don't ever look at people's resumes. That all happens before they get to my interactions with them. So I don't really have a ton to say here other than try to look professional, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of did the same thing. No cover letter. Grades weren't really in there. I used the same resume for every job that I applied for, but I think what can be taken away from this is really important that in your resume, as you talk about the things you've done, to really focus on the impact of what you've done and less actually what it was. That's how we write all of our performance feedback within these big companies, and that's kind of what the recruiters are looking for too. So instead of being like, oh, I built this app, it does X, be like, I built this app, and because I built this app, 100 people are able to do something they weren't able to do before. And like that really catches recruiters' eyes where they're reading resumes.
And are they reading resumes anymore, or are we actually talking about resume scanners at this point?
I don't know.
I can't say for sure. I imagine there's probably some scanning happening before they're handed off to recruiters. So yeah, like Matt said, when we interview people, the resumes are basically looked at by folks that handle recruiting ahead of time. And then we're just kind of passed a candidate with the understanding that, okay, they passed the initial screening. Your job is to now assess them on a technical level. So I was talking a little bit before we officially got started here that I've done a fair amount of like university outreach and stuff with Google. So I've actually hosted a couple of like interview and resume workshops. I have some materials that I'm actually happy to share, and you can, distribute or maybe not directly. I have some information I can share with you that you can distribute to students afterwards about exactly how to structure your resume in a way that it's most likely to be picked up by recruiters. And just like what Cap was saying, like the best way to kind of like phrase things is this sort of like accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z is sort of the ideal way to like phrase things.
And it
so
sounds like in that context, if we're thinking about, sort of the things we did in class projects, we may or may not be able to express that. But if we have personal projects or other side projects, that might be a better way to go.
Yeah. If you have personal projects, I think that's the best way to kind of put things together. I also did want to mention too, as far as grades go, I don't think there's like a hard like cutoff that's a rule. I know for sure I've worked with software engineers that either like didn't go to college at all or didn't go to college for computer science. Pro maneuver, UBC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry?
Well, I was just going to like plus one onto that like I've interviewed tons of folks who have not had any formal education, who have had formal education, went to big schools, have a master's degree with all straight 4.0 GPAs and whatever, or they don't tell you their grades because they don't want to. So I think it really covers a big spectrum there. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that.
One of the best engineers I worked with at YouTube came straight from Starbucks to Google with no formal education at all. He had like high school diploma, and then he like wrote some bots or something for like automating parts of like his Dungeons and Dragon campaign, or like automating like, I don't know, I don't even understand what he was doing. Anyways, he figured that's how he learned how to code, and then he came straight to Google from like his barista job. So that does happen. That's not me telling you to drop out, by the way, just for clarification. That's not at all what I'm saying, but there's no hard like grade cutoff though. So, apply anyways.
Yeah, when it comes to people straight out of school, I think that if you have any experience with research, I think that helped me. I had that on my resume. I worked with a number of professors at UBCO, and we had 1 or 2 publications that I was able to put, because you don't necessarily have the traditional impactful work that you can quote. So things like that, personal projects, as been mentioned. I think a lot of people from the resumes I've seen put the types of classes that they've taken, maybe just for context. Personally, when I interview people, and I've interviewed at Bloomberg as well as here, they teach you on a technical level to not look at resumes because they can impact your opinion of the candidate if you have a certain association with a school. So they teach us now to not look at resumes, but I've also been on the post interview side where we are hiring someone, and that is also when your resume does come into play a little bit when it comes to team matching. So if you are on a hiring committee, you are looking at resumes for kind of for fit and other things. So it does come to play a little bit later.
Also, for what it's worth, I had class projects on my resume and I just listed them as like projects and then some personal, some class ones. And I didn't say they were class projects. I was just like named it and what it did, why it was cool, what the impact was.
I see a couple of questions in the chat also. So one question, leak code plus personal projects are greater than grades. Yes, I would say. And so the thing with the personal projects too is that those are more what's going to get you noticed by the recruiter. So the recruiter, I feel, is who kind of like sees personal projects, contacts you, does the initial phone screen and stuff. When you're handed off to an engineer for the technical interview, it's fairly unlikely. Like I don't bother looking at the personal projects if I look at the resume. So it's kind of, I guess it's almost like there's three different skill sets. There's like actually being good at your job, then there's being good at interviews, and then there's like getting the interview. So getting the interview comes from like having projects and having like a solid resume, and then passing the interview comes from being good at data structures and algorithms and like your fundamentals of computer science. And then being good at your job is like, it's weird because I'm kind of implying that it's like sort of your last priority, but it kind of is in this context. It's kind of like, yeah, worry about that later. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I just want to make sure we cover the other questions that we had. Maybe if you guys could tell us about what a typical day looks like when you're working at your company.
I can go first for this one. So for me, if I wanted to like kind of break it down at a very high level, I would say it's about 60% making things and about 40% looking at other people's work. Now in that 40%, that's doing things like code reviews, design reviews, helping other people debug issues that they're having. And then that other 60% is kind of where I get to actually like make things for other people to look at, whether that's writing code, writing design docs, doing interviews, which I guess kind of falls out of that bucket, but whatever. And like all that sort of stuff. So I think that that's kind of the high level split. As far as like what I'm actually working on, it's very dependent on what part of the project lifecycle it's in, where earlier on you're doing a lot more docs and design work and research on how to actually solve the problem versus later on you're actually implementing it. And then of course there's always the mad scramble at the end to try to get it out the door. So.
I can hop on as well. Yeah, very similar. I think I try to structure my day to unblock the people I'm working with. So if you are working as part of a team, you may have people that need things from you, whether it's code reviews, whether it's docs, whether it's looking at something and giving your okay from another team. So a lot of it is unblocking other people, and a lot of it is just using your time to complete the task that you've been given, whether or not that is on a design level or it's an implementation level. We have generally free form blocks of time that you can structure and do whatever it is that you want with. You could just, I don't know, play Xbox, but if you're working from home, but it's good to use your time effectively and however it is that that works best for you. I know that other companies may not have that amount of freedom, but I think generally we do.
Ethan or Cappy, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess very similar. All three of us are at Google, so we all kind of have similar work days, I guess. So for my job right now, I would say it's probably similar to that kind of 60-40 split that Matt described as far as like making things versus looking at other people's stuff. That can change a little bit. The role that I'm in right now is a lot of like building new stuff that doesn't exist yet. My first role at YouTube was a lot of like iterating on stuff that was already built and like migrating stuff to, you know, new frameworks or new ways of doing stuff, because YouTube is like an old product and is very, very mature. And so depending on what you're working on, like when I was at YouTube, I'd say much more of my job was looking at other people's work. I'd say probably like almost 70 or 80% of what I was doing was like that. I used to joke that my job was like more like being an archaeologist, because it was just like looking at a whole bunch of like really old code and trying to understand what somebody was trying to do, or like what this was supposed to do, or how it worked, so that we could make incremental improvements to it. So depending on where you are, you might wind up in a situation where, yeah, you're looking at old stuff and trying to figure out how it was built so you can make it better. Or you could wind up, building brand new kind of, greenfield development, brand new stuff. But yeah, Google offers us like a lot of flexibility. You kind of make your own hours as long as you deliver stuff when you say that it's going to be done. And it's a lot of teamwork. So like, yeah, reviewing other people's content to make sure that they're not blocked waiting for your review. So.
My day is pretty much very similar. Write a lot of code.
Did you say you get to write a lot of code? That does not sound like my day at all.
I write a ton of actually, that's probably different because I work on like a small startup style team. I spend probably 80% of my day writing code, and then 10% helping other people, and then 10% doing like product and design work beyond engineering.
Yeah, that's closer to what I've been doing. Oh, also document
over there. I'm telling you, I don't think I wrote code all week.
As you start building bigger things too, documentation does become a bigger part of your job. So it's more, diagrams and, writing pages of explaining how something's supposed to work before you start coding it, so that other people can punch holes in your idea and tell you how awful everything you thought of is before you invest a bunch of time building it.
I would say that, like, for me, that aspect of it specifically was a big learning curve where I came in and I was like, oh, I'm really smart. I got a job at Google. I'm going to go write code. Turns out everybody's really smart. You're not special, and everybody knows more than you. And the earlier that they can tell you you're wrong, the better. And so I think that getting good at writing design docs is a big part of getting good at your job.
So would you say that ratio changed as you got more senior? Like when you first started, did you actually spend that, a relatively same ratio as you do now on writing code versus working with other people?
For me, it was much more code early on, because I think earlier on in your career, you're kind of given more self-contained tasks where it's like, okay, somebody else has kind of thought about the broader implications of this task, but we just need somebody to go and do it. And then that's kind of given to you when you're a new grad level. And then as you kind of grow, you become the person who has to think about those broader implications, do that cross-team collaboration with maybe it's other teams, maybe it's UX, maybe it's product management folks, like whoever it may be. And then there's a lot less coding and a lot more meetings and docs and kind of higher level engineering.
I find it fluctuates with role and also point in the project. So like at the start of a project, you might have more meetings. Towards the end, you're executing more. It can kind of fluctuate.
Yeah, like when you start out, you get a lot more of these tasks that are like very well defined. Like someone will tell you, like, I need you to write me a function that takes X and delivers Y, and like that's it. And that's really easy to just start coding. It doesn't require a lot of like design. And then as you work a little longer, you start getting into tasks that are like much more nebulous, much more ambiguous, not well defined. And someone will just drop something on your lap that's just like, I need you to write something that like reminds people to drink water. And it's like, okay, so what, like on their phone, on their laptop? I don't know, figure it out. And it's just like a very, very ambiguous, like, not well-defined problem at all. And you just kind of have to go from there. And that's where you have to do a lot of design work and write things down so that other people can tear your ideas to shreds before you've invested. So.
Yeah, indeed. So I wish I knew that writing was such a big part of working. Writing is huge. You write docs, you write comments for other people. It's how do you get your information across in an effective way. That was definitely something that was a learning curve for me.
You mean we didn't cover it enough in our soft-eng class and our capstone back then?
I'm not saying I didn't pay attention in that class, but no, I paid very much attention. It was great. But yeah, I agree with Yarko, where writing is really important, especially in our work from home world, where you don't get to actually talk to people. It's even more important. And making sure that you are clear in your communications is a skill that is not easy. And it's very easy to make assumptions and then find out weeks later that you were wrong.
Something that I wish I knew when I started was that it's okay and it's expected to ask a lot of questions. You get into a role at one of these large companies where you are surrounded by a lot of very smart, very professionally and academically successful people, and it's really, really easy to just kind of find yourself in a position where you're dealing with like a lot of imposter syndrome, and people are like talking and throwing around like acronyms and like terms you're not familiar with. And it's easy to like find yourself sitting there being like, oh, I'm not going to ask what that is because I don't want anybody to know that I don't know what that acronym was, because I should have known it or I should have learned it in school. And it's totally fine to just ask questions. Like there's nothing that you're going to ask that's going to be like, that's going to actually be dumb enough that someone's going to be like, why are you here? I've had, meetings where we've been, in the room with like very high level, engineers, directors, leadership and stuff, where we've been talking about something, and, people who've been working in the industry much longer than me asked me or my team, what kind of, some basic acronym or some basic term meant. And it goes like all the way from the bottom to the top. People just like, there's specific domain knowledge that you don't even realize is specific. And when that happens, like, just ask questions. Nobody's going to be worried that you don't know what you should,
Kind of build off Ethan. I kind of wish I knew that your education really only starts when you get a job. Like, I feel like I had this notion that I was like, oh, I'm educated now, I'm a coder, and then I'm gonna go get a job and now I just do my job. But really, you are still learning, and you're learning so much more at your work than you really will learn at school. Like, I probably only became comfortable being like, yeah, I'm a good coder like 2.5 years ago. Like, you spend years just like learning tons of stuff. So don't feel like when you start jobs that you need to know everything.
Not to diminish what UBCO teaches, it's just a different set of skills. I think that is difficult to translate in a classroom environment. So you gotta pick it up on the job. Some of those things being like reading a lot of code. I would say that when you are working with code, that's something that you have to just get very comfortable with. Is being able to consume, follow code, be able to dig through it. I think for me, it took a number of years just to get very comfortable to be able to dive into a random code base and be able to see what's actually happening. That is, especially when you work with code bases that are tens or hundreds of thousands of lines. So being able to build up that mental map of how the program is composed, that is definitely a challenge.
So is there anything you think you would have done differently if you kind of knew this was the journey and experience that you'd have?
I would have coded more in college. I think I wrote next to no code in university. Like, I had a few projects. I studied math first, and then I jumped onto comp sci later. And I really had like very little just coding experience going in. I think if you still want to like code or work on anything, take the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, probably the nearest experience that you can get is looking at open source projects and try to parse through them, try to do maybe some small contributions, and try to just be able to understand some part of a large code base. I think that might give you a little bit of that muscle memory that you would need at working for a production corporate environment.
I would have invested more in understanding true like full stack development. I was very much under the impression that like all of the like really cool high tech stuff happens on like the back end, and that like the front end is just like for artists that want to make things look pretty. And that's not at all true. Like all of the optimization problems that I run into regularly are issues with like how we're moving data around on the front end, on the client side, and the back end actually isn't doing that much for us. And so, yeah, this idea that like the front end is just aesthetics and the back end is where all the cool theory is something that I wish I didn't subscribe to when I was in school, and I spent more time on more of a full stack skill set. So
I don't know if this really answers the question, but I feel like it's kind of in the same vein, but just like be aware that imposter syndrome is real. Like I can't speak for other people, of course, but I had imposter syndrome like crazy for how long have I been in? So I've been at Google for 5.5 years. So I've had imposter syndrome for 5.5 years. Like it's something that a lot of people experience. A lot of people go through where you come in and you're used to like being able to solve problems, because problems that are presented to you in university are problems that have solutions. And then you come into work and it's like, oh, well, I don't know how to do that. I must be an idiot. No, you're not an idiot. You just need to go and ask for help, and nobody's going to judge you for asking for help. And I think that this kind of goes to Ethan's point of like, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not know the answer. It's okay to learn. And I think that that would be the biggest thing I would tell myself when I'm starting out.
The imposter syndrome, I think, is similar to what some people probably have experienced if you've been like, you know, like athletes or something through high school, where you get to a certain point where you're in like the top, you know, 1% of whatever sport you do. And then you like go to university or you make, you know, a college team or something. And then you realize that you're in the top 1%, but you're not in the top 0.5%. And all of a sudden there's this like, you're all of a sudden for the first time in your life, you're the worst person on the team. And it's really, really psychologically jarring if you're not ready for it. And there's kind of a similar thing that happens, you know, if you've been very successful in school and, you know, academics for most of your life. And then at a certain point, you kind of like surround yourself with other people who are also like that. It can be very, very jarring. And it's just worth, yeah, like Matt said, just knowing that that's a thing, being aware of it.
Yeah, I think, you know, in the beginning, when you guys talked about how has UBCO changed in the past 10 years or so, I think that is one of the things that we've noticed a lot more is that with the increase in the student population, I think that issue has come up where, you know, if people don't know things, they won't ask questions at all, right? And, you know, back in the days when the classes were small, it's so easy to ask questions. It's so easy to interact with each other. But now I think it's just so much easier to lose students. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a really hard problem to solve, right? And I look forward to the day that is no longer a problem, but I don't know how that happens.
Okay, so our last question is more of a fun question. I don't know if you've thought about it. Where do you see yourself in 10 years from now? You know, are you thinking of moving around to another fan company or other big companies, doing your own startup, ideas that you've had, or just being retired because you've made so much money?
I can go. I think my like 10-year plan currently is I'm actually about to leave Facebook to join a startup that someone like a friend of mine who's starting, and I'm joining that startup to get my green card. And then after that, I want to start building my own companies. So I'm hoping to see myself there in 10 years as well.
I think for a lot of people, getting to a big company is a way forward to climbing the ladder. I've known a lot of people here that have been around for 10, 15 years at Google, and the same thing at Bloomberg. So that's definitely a path forward for a lot of people. You know, you get familiar with a product and you can continue to get larger scope of projects. Maybe you're managing multiple teams. Personally, I'm not sure if I want to go down that route. I have yet to explore the startup world, so maybe something to look into. But really hard to judge where you might be this far out.
Matt and Ethan?
Yeah, I can give probably the opposite answer to both Garrick and Cappy. I don't want to move at all. Like, I am perfectly happy right where I am. I feel like at this point, I generally know what I'm doing, and I'm able to do it in a timeline that lets me have a life outside of work. And I have a young daughter. We're moving up to Canada to be closer to family. Like, for me, that's the more important part of life. Like, work is work, and it's important, don't get me wrong, and I take it seriously. My boss was here, I take it very seriously. But I think that for me, this is a great job to kind of be in, have an impact, feel like I'm doing work that's important, but also be able to have a life. And I don't want that to change. So I don't see any change.
I never have a good answer to these questions because every time this comes up, I'm like, I don't know, man. I wasn't supposed to make it this far, so I don't I don't have a plan. I can see myself probably moving around to, you know, another FANG company in the next 5 years, probably. I wouldn't mind going to a startup just because it would be cool to like. It would be cool to have the opportunity to work on something that I felt a little more in control of, and that I kind of could feel like I really believed in and like really wanted to bring, you know, forward. So that would be like cool to be able to do at some point, but I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. So I'm going to say in the next 5 years, I'll probably move to 1 or 2 other, you know, FANG companies, and you know, beyond that, I'm still kind of figuring things out. Yeah.
Oh, that all sounds good. So that gives us a few minutes left for any questions from the audience. All right, so sounds good. So thank you all again. So thanks so much for our panelists. We appreciate you taking your time to come here. If you were here, I'd be handing you UBCO swag right now, but you're not. So maybe we'll send them over to you one day. But for now, I guess we'll just send you virtual applause. So thank you.